Love it. How you doing?
To my left is Emerald Snipes Garner, daughter of Eric Garner. To my right, Eric Garner Jr. And standing behind me is the attorney for the family, Jonathan Moore, and attorney Michael Hardy, who's worked on this case with Jonathan, and his general counsel and executive vice president of National Action Network. Today, Daniel Pantaleo lost his job, but 5 years ago, Eric Garner lost his life. And even though it is appropriate and in our judgment deserving what the commissioner has decided and announced today, let us not forget that Eric Garner lost his life 5 years ago in an illegal process that both the district attorney in Staten Island and the judge ruling that there was evidence that she recommended that the actions of the police was in fact the contributing factor to the death of Eric Garner. Let us be real clear that though I agree with the decision of the commissioner to follow the recommendation of Judge Rose Marie Maldonado, that in the process, let us not convict Eric Garner of things that did not end up proven in any court of law. To say that Eric Garner was doing things that has not been established is to desecrate the memory of a man who was the victim here. Let us also remember there were other officers involved that ought to also be dealt with. There was the arrest report saying he had 10,000 cigarettes when he did not. What is going to happen to that officer? There is the allegation that he was selling. Well, there are eyewitnesses that said he was breaking up a fight. So we cannot look at the record of Pantaleo and not also say that none of the allegations against Eric Garner by the same police that were involved in his chokehold death may have alleged but was never established in a court of law. So as this family continues to grieve and mourn on the death of Eric Garner and have lost two family members, Erica Garner and now Ben, who we funeralized just Friday, who was a stepfather, and we believe that the stress and pain contributed to their early deaths. So though this may be good for the city, that the city enforce its policies, this is not some moment of pleasure or joy for the family that has lost so much and could have expected that the city would have treated Eric Garner or any other citizen with the due process of law and following of police policies. To not have terminated Pantaleo would have said the guidelines mean nothing, the administrative judge means nothing, the process means nothing. It was clear in the only proceedings that happened that Eric Garner was a victim of a policeman that broke policy and in fact contributed to his death. And all else about Eric Garner is speculation and reckless and should not be part of we move forward on. It is in light of that, that we continue to call for Congressman Matt Nadler, who committed congressional hearings, to move forward. We need to investigate why the federal government around the country, including Eric Garner, decides not to bring cases into federal court and let a jury decide whether or not Garner had 10,000 cigarettes. Let a jury decide whether his civil rights was violated and whether or not the police operated in a manner that robbed him of his civil rights. And the same should be of other cases around the country, which is why the Judiciary Committee ought to have those public hearings starting in New York. Secondly, we will be going to the state of New York to ask that they begin to make it illegal by law, the use of the chokehold. This was a New York policy, New York City Police Department policy. It ought to be a state law and a federal law that chokeholds by police is punishable with a crime, not just termination. And I think that it is clear today is a better day than it's been, but it's a day that's 5 years too late and 5 years of pain and misery that will never end for this family. Let us also remember that we need to have laws in place that will limit the amount of time that the police department can proceed, no matter what other investigative bodies are in the midst of an investigation. I heard the commissioner say that they was asked to step aside. There ought to be a time limit on that, because the presumption is that whomever they are deferring to, that the family tried to show respect for, the presumption is that the conclusion would be that they would proceed in a just manner. And that did not happen with the Staten Island grand jury, and it did not happen with the federal prosecutors. It never even got to a federal grand jury. So though Pantaleo is no longer on the force, that's good for the citizens of the city that he's no longer going to be on the force. But this is the beginning, not the end, of dealing with this situation of chokeholds by police. It must be made illegal, and we must know why the federal government did not proceed in many cases, including the Eric Garner case, which was the case that started a new energy around our fighting for Black Lives Matter. But as we deal with this, let us be very clear that we are relieved, but we're not celebratory. There's nothing to celebrate, because Pantaleo will go home a terminated man, but this family had to go to a funeral. There's nothing to celebrate when your father and the son of Gwen has to hear these unproven allegations of what Eric Garner was doing that day, while we hear of the record of service of Pantaleo. There was no jury or court that ruled that Eric Garner was doing any of what was alleged. There was testimony, and there was never a trial that was presented with a counter-argument by those that would be able to refute whatever charges was made. But having said that, I take issue with one thing the commissioner said. I commend him for not breaking the policy. I commend him for not putting this city in a situation where we feel that guidelines and administrative judges' recommendations are meaningless. I commend him for saying that, in fact, that it is established by the trial that this was a chokehold. I do take issue when it is said that if I was a policeman, I would be mad about this. A policeman ought to not be mad that the guidelines they were trained on were enforced. What kind of policeman do we have that would be angry that policy was violated? What kind of policeman do we have that would be upset that the commissioner listened to the evidence presented by an administrative judge? There are those of us in the movement for criminal justice that has been said we have low opinions of police. Maybe we have higher opinions than some of the police authorities, because the policemen ought to not be mad. They ought to say, what I was trained to do is what I am expected to do, and that those that violate policy are going to be treated and given the punishment that is meted by that, just like those that I may arrest on a daily basis. You cannot have a set of rules for citizens and a different set of rules for policemen. They must follow the law and follow policy, and they should not be mad about it. They ought to say, I work in a department that I am held accountable, and that is what protect and serve would mean. We denounced and continue to denounce those that throw water on police and do other things at police. We're not for harming police. I don't see why any police today would be mad that citizens don't want to see citizens harmed by police, particularly against guidelines. Pantiello was in the training. He knew the guidelines. At whatever point he decided to violate them, he had stepped over that line, and he was held accountable today. That's good for the city. It is no comfort for this family. And it cannot stop there. It must be law, so that we don't have from one administration to the next, from one commissioner to the next, whether those guidelines are going to be enforced and whether those guidelines remain. So as we note today, as I said, we are relieved but not celebratory. And we are challenging this city to now move to the next step of making chokeholds illegal and to not castigate and disparage the name of Eric Garner on unproven allegations. If everything they charged and everything they accused and everything they alleged on Eric Garner were true, it still does not justify Daniel Pantiello to put a chokehold on him and cause his death, and for the officers to put false information on their reports, and the others that came and did not do what could have been done to save his life. So let us know that this is not the end. It is the beginning of the next phase of continuing to fight for justice. Let us hear from Emerald Snipes Garner.
Good afternoon. Today we got the decision, and as Reverend Sharpton said, the commissioner has decided to fire the officer. I thank Reverend Sharpton for standing with us for the past 5 years. I don't believe that if Reverend Sharpton hasn't been standing with us, we wouldn't have been able to get this far. I thank everybody who's been standing with my family for the past 5 years, and I thank everyone who has been out on the front line, everyone who's been screaming fire Pantaleo, because now he's fired. And for, Commissioner O'Neill, I thank you for doing the right thing. I truly, sincerely thank you for firing the officer. Regardless to however you came up to your decision, you finally made a decision that should have been made 5 years ago. And it's unfortunate that we went from one administration to the next. We can't talk about what happened in the past. We can only talk about what we're going to do moving forward. We will be going for the congressional hearings. We will be trying to reopen the case. We will be going after the rest of the officers involved, because it's not over. Justice for New York City means Pantaleo is fired and there's no murdering cop on the police force. So Commissioner O'Neill, while we appreciate you making your decision, we are definitely still calling for the Eric Garner law, which will ban the chokehold, which will ban officers being protected by a shield and not held accountable for their actions. Eric Garner was killed 5 years ago. It took 5 years for the officer to be fired. I don't want another Eric Garner. I will do everything in my power to never see another Eric Garner. I don't even want to see another video of a person being choked out, because it wasn't supposed to happen to him, and it's not supposed to happen. I should not be here standing with my brother fatherless. I should be here with my father. But Pantaleo took that away from me on 7/17. So, yes, he's fired, but the fight is not over. We will continue to fight. Thank you.
Eric, as I said before, I take questions. Jonathan Moore, the attorney for the family.
Thank you, Reverend. This is not a day of celebration. It's a day that should have happened, as Emerald said, 5 years ago, actually 5 years and 5 weeks ago. This is a tragedy for the city. It's a tragedy for the Garner family, but it's really a tragedy for the rule of law. Think of all the institutions that have looked at this case and have said, we're not going to do anything. The district attorney of Richmond County, the Department of Justice under Barack Obama, the Department of Justice under Donald Trump. All these institutions have dropped the ball, and they continue to drop the ball because not only, although Daniel Pantaleo has been fired, he's a free man. Although Daniel Pantaleo is fired, the other officers who contributed to the death of Eric Garner are still serving and protecting on behalf of the New York City Police Department. And we call on the city, we call on the DA of Staten Island to release those transcripts of the officers who testified at the grand jury. Let's get to the full truth of what they did, and let's make sure that they're also held accountable for what happened on that terrible day.
Before taking questions, Fred Davies of the CCRB is not in town but has sent a statement. Jerica Richardson, Senior Advisor and Secretary to the Board of the CCRB, is going to read his statement.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton. And to the entire Garner family, you have suffered such unspeakable loss. And I just want you to know on behalf of the CCRB that despite that loss, you continue to inspire us, and our hearts and our prayers remain with you. And I'd also like to thank all of the attorneys, including the attorneys at the CCRB who prosecuted this case. I want to thank the advocates and the activists and all the everyday people that rallied and called for justice for Eric. It is because of them that we're here today. And it is with great humility and gratitude that I stand on behalf of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, the only oversight entity and the largest oversight entity in the nation. We're the only one that administratively prosecutes police officers for misconduct. And we only exist and we only are here because of the community. And I'll tell you, I have mixed emotions. There's a lot more that we need to do to strengthen accountability, not only in New York City, but this nation. And so I'd just like to take a moment to share the words of Reverend Fred Davey, our chair. After 5 long years, Eric Garner's family, the city of New York, and a nation that long has had watchful eyes upon this case finally has some closure. Make no mistake, this process took entirely too long. And the tragic reality is that neither a verdict from a judge, a decision from a police commissioner, neither of these can reverse what happened on July 17th, 2014. Officer Daniel Pantaleo's termination from the New York City Police Department does not make the death of Eric Garner any less harrowing, but it's heartening to know that some element of justice has been served. Given the evidence the CCRB's prosecutors presented at trial, the police commissioner had no option but to dismiss Pantaleo from the department. While July 17th is and always will be a somber day for the city of New York, Today, we can rest assured that Daniel Pantaleo will never patrol our streets again. Thank you.
All right, are there any questions?
Reverend Sharpton, a few weeks ago, we were in the same room when Judge Maldonado's decision became public. And at that time, Senator Kristen Gillibrand called for the Staten Island Grand to reopen the investigation. Is there any update on that front?
We have not heard an update. We certainly support that. We certainly have a new district attorney that ought to reopen the grand jury and go over the grand jury testimony of those officers to see if anyone perjured themselves in the grand jury. Because once you testify in front of a grand jury, you're subject to perjury. So like I said, this is far from over. And included in calling for the reconvening of the grand jury in Staten Island under a new prosecutor is also the congressional hearings that was committed to us, and we intend to go to Albany. The governor said Pantaleo should be fired. Well, if he should have been fired for chokehold, let's make a state law about chokehold, the Eric Garner law. Yes.
Reverend, have you asked Eric Holder why the DOJ didn't act on the civil rights investigation before the Obama administration wrapped up 2.5 years after Mr. Garner was killed?
Well, when Eric Garner left office, it was still an open investigation.
You asked him why they didn't wrap it up?
No, I did not. And again, it was still under investigation. It would have been inappropriate for him to comment on an ongoing investigation with me.
Reverend Sharpton, after O'Neill Ranger's decision made the announcement this morning, he issued a statement saying that he was succumbing to cop haters and extremists. How do you respond to the indication from the PBA that this was an unjustified termination?
Well, first of all, the guidelines of the police department is what he violated. Activists didn't write the guidelines. Advocates didn't write the guidelines. And people that want to see a city that everyone is under the law, including those that enforce the law, are the ones that say he had to, in fact, be punished if he stepped over the lines of what the policy dictated. Let's be very clear. Judge Maldonado made the recommendation in a statement that there was no ambiguity. Al Sharpton didn't make the recommendation. The Garner family didn't make the recommendation. So is he calling the administrative judge a cop hater? Is he calling O'Neill a cop hater? These are people in the force that have worked their ways up in the rank. I heard the commissioner say he served over 3 decades in the police force. Now he's a police hater because he said, I'm following the guidelines. I think he said he didn't hear or make any decisions at all based on public sentiment. So again, what is the evidence that anybody and everybody that was involved in calling for justice here hates police? No, we expect more of police. And we have the right to expect that at least they're going to follow the guidelines that they were trained on.
Ramsey Orta is a young man that brought this whole situation to light and reported the whole incident. He's in jail now. Do we know if something can happen with him, or how do we talk?
Again, there are many of us that are looking into that. And when I hear his name, I have to think of Ben Carr, who we funeralized on Friday, who stood by Orta and kept bringing them to us. And it was his video that the whole world has seen. But suppose if Orta hadn't had that video, suppose if Orta had not released it and then had subsequent questionable situations, we would not even be talking about a termination, and we certainly wouldn't have had a trial, because even with a video, I remind you, I was involved in the Rodney King case. In the Rodney King case, a video mattered. In New York, in 2014, a video didn't even matter. Anyone else? We only got 2 reporters that got questions. Okay. Oh, you're the spokesman for the group.
Just joking. Also in the PBA to the rank and file of the NYPD saying this means that the administration doesn't have your back. They don't support you. You're on your own, and call your union rep before you even make an arrest. A lot of people are interpreting that as, look, we're going to retaliate by not doing our jobs because we're in disagreement with this decision. Do you have any comments?
If there is a slowdown by calling the union before you do an arrest, then those officers ought to be terminated and investigated for obstructing justice. In communities that we deal with high crimes, we cannot afford police to not do their job, but their job is within the guidelines that they're trained on. And I think that it is one of the most despicable suggestions to say that police should call the union before they make an arrest. Did Mr. Pantaleo call the union before he choked Eric Garner? I think that that suggestion is 5 years too late.
Brother Chuck, you mentioned in passing some of the anti-police violence. I wonder if you could add.
Again, we do not support, condone, and will actively be against any violence against police. We're not anti-police. We're anti-police brutality. Many members of our community, many members of our churches, members of National Action Network are police. We're not anti-police. They're trying to do a broad stroke that we're anti-police. To say that a policeman, that even the police leadership said, violated policy, makes you anti-police, is to say that police should be able to do whatever they want to do. That ought not to be accepted in this country. We cannot have any segment of society where people are above the law. I know we're in the Trump era, but we've not lost our minds.
That's right.
In terms of the officers that were on the scene, do you think they should go to disciplinary trials or
They should absolutely go to disciplinary trials, or even further, if they issued false statements. If they offered false statements in the grand jury, that's perjury, which is why the case should be reopened and it ought to be reviewed. Because now there's a finding of the facts in this internal investigation and trial that ought to be matched with what was told to a grand jury, which is subject to perjury laws.
I noticed on the wall back here, a photo of you with Baez's mother during the fight of the voting issue. The voting ultimately was convicted federal civil rights issue. And the one case that the judge said was most like this case here in your ruling, and it's bolstered her decision here. Do you think that the Trump administration, in waiting out 5 years after litigation, purposely tried to avoid a similar federal civil rights, criminal civil rights trial against NLL?
I would say that I do not know what was done on purpose, but I know what was done. And what was done was the opposite of what was done in the Lavoti case. I know that there were those in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, according to many reports, that said they wanted to proceed, and all of a sudden they were stopped. And I know for a fact that there was enough evidence to go forward, and they decided not to go with it. I will not be as reckless as the president is with his tweets on me and saying it was done on purpose, but it was done in fact.
Reverend, today Commissioner O'Neill said that First Deputy Commissioner Ben Tucker reached out to the Garner family to respond. Will the Garner family be reaching out to First Deputy Commissioner Ben Tucker? Will it be a dialogue?
That is up to the family, and we not discuss that in public. Again, the dialogue is going to be with the Congress and the state. Other dialogues we will deal with when we deal with it.
Can I ask Ms. Garner, the police commissioner said that when he watches that horrifying video, he has a gut reaction, quote, Mr. Garner, don't do it. Mr. Garner, don't do it, comply. What did you make of the police commissioner's statement about his gut reaction when he watches that video?
I think he had a misspeak. I think he meant to say, Pantaleo, don't do it, let him go, get off of him. That's what I think. I think he misspoke. And I think that he watched the video, and he is in fact a human being with a heart. and a conscience to say that, Pantaleo, you did something wrong. So I heard what he said, but I think he just misspoke.
Can you talk to us about the shirt that you're wearing?
This is the shirt that I wore about 2 weeks ago while we were standing up here. Officer Pantaleo, well, now I can say Daniel Pantaleo is a murderer, and that's just how I feel. I wear my emotions on my sleeve, and now I wear it on my chest. I feel that he is a murderer. I feel that he could have gotten off of Eric Garner. I feel that he made a choice, and everybody has a choice. When you're in life, you have a choice. You watch The Matrix, you take a red pill or a blue pill. So I'm just saying, I feel as though he is a murderer. I feel like he murdered Eric Garner.
And let me say, she's not the only one today that said he could have gotten up. The commissioner said it.
Commissioner said it. Yeah.
I guess he's a cop hater.
And the first deputy.
Ms. Garner, just you have the transcript to clarify. Commissioner O'Neill said, when I watched the video, I said to myself, Mr. Garner, don't do it, comply. And I said to Officer Pantaleo, don't do it. And about the decisions made by both Officer Pantaleo and Mr. Garner. Sir, when you watched that video, what did you say?
When I watched the video, I see my father being killed.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, you have been listening to Al